Um, so anyway, keyboard input is inheriting everything from base input, and base input is inheriting from model behavior. So you stop there because that's just a Unity default class. But I see it's also inheriting from I input. So the thing with inheritance is you can only have one parent, and it's to like stop just like this just an insanity of having all these like multiple parents that you don't. There's a lot of like conflicts that can happen, but you can inherit from multiple interfaces. So I could jump over to that file. And interfaces are like kind of like an abstract class. They just say like, oh, there will be some like methods, but I'm not going to define what they are. So it looks like there's this input data, generate input. So I'm just making sure I can see what's all connecting up into. Okay, the struct. Okay, so basically it's saying that the input that's allowed comes all the way up to here. This struct. Struct is a class, just a simplified class. It's methods basically. So we have a bool for it can accelerate, can it break, or is it breaking, and how much of a turning input is happening at the moment. So it's a float. So okay. So basically, currently the carding class is only allowing these three. So eventually, if you want to jump, you'll probably have to put it here in this struct that's under here in the base input class. Because when it generates through, that's where you get access to this right here: accelerate, break, and turn. See how if I hover over it, it's saying input data dot. That input data is a struct class, or a struct, I should say, that's being created and stored in this interface I input. So anyway, eventually, what you'll probably want to do is figure out what type of variable you want to deal with the jump. I'm going to guess it'll probably be a float because I'm like saying how much. You probably want to add a force. Let's just see how accelerate is working. And since accelerate is forward backward, like along the z-axis, probably turning is something similar. But accelerate, you might want to jump. Will probably just be a vertical accelerate. But you'll have to put a line in here. Maybe it'd be like a bool, like vertical accelerate. But then you'll need a string here, and it'll be like jump button name jump. So I guess eventually what you were saying is that this input manager, you don't know what's going on with this. So what you'll have here is something like, I'm not sure yet how this will all come out, but you'll probably want something like jump button name, jump, and then I'm going to follow accelerate, I think, for now. Because I'm going to see, I'm thinking it's going to be a very similar, like as I was saying, just a vertical accelerate. And then we'll have to go into the input manager. But notice that it's saying, hey, there's no jump here. So that's because over here, hopefully this won't crash. Usually, I think, okay. I'll just copy this and say jump for now. All right, and so since I put this jump in the struct here, if I jump over here, notice how this jump isn't error anymore. It says like this doesn't exist because it was referencing that struct. So okay, we updated our keyboard input and our base input to have a jump. Now what it's saying here is get input get button. What that means is if you come over here and is it project settings? Yeah, input manager, the axes. So this is all the default inputs that are very similar, are very like conventional in gaming. So for example, horizontal, a horizontal axis is mapped to the left and the right button and the A and the D key. So when you play a first-person shooter or something, normally you're using ADWS, um, or you're using the little arrow keys. So they've already done a lot of the mapping for you. So when it's saying turn input name horizontal, and it's saying uh, horizontal, turn input get access horizontal, it's referencing this here. So it's like a nice abstracted way. You don't want to hard code and say, no, my game only uses A, D, left, right, because um, first off, that might not be true across all platforms, and users like to change these settings and use this type of mapping tool, this input manager. So in this case, whenever we press A, we're going to have a horizontal axis. So left, so when the user is not pressing left or right, you'll get back like a 0, meaning there is no horizontal input coming through the hardware right now. When the player holds the left key, or A, which is also left, they'll get like a -1 will be coming through. So you know that in your code, when your horizontal axis is coming in as a -1, the user's pressing left. So you execute code, in this case, turn left or what have you, and the opposite for D, and the right arrow will come in as a 1 on the horizontal axis. And so we'll see like where these values are being connected to. But just so you understand that this value that comes in, you see that it's a float. It returns a float from -1 to 1. Now on the keyboard, you'll get hard numbers, -1, 0, 1. But on a controller, like a gamepad controller, like soft touches, or they call it like capacitance or something. But like if you're just slightly touching the gamepad controller to the left, it might get like a -0.2 or something like that. There's numbers. That's why it's a float. It's a range of how strong is the user pressing left or right. Does that make sense so far? Right. Um, and I think the student who actually asked me to go over this isn't here, right? That's a good thing I'm recording, so you can just watch the video of it then. In either case, the next step, now I've set up my input. So notice one thing I've left to do is notice I have break button name and accelerate button name. And I put in jump button name. I just wrote that, but I'm going to have to find the real name for it. So if I map down here, we have the accelerate button name, which actually maps to, I think it's going to map to here. So let's see, accelerate button name. Okay, in this case, it's up for the keyboard and joystick button 0 if you're using a gamepad. And we have break button name. So there's break button name, which will be the down arrow. And I wanted to put something for jump. So let's see if they have a jump. Yes, they do. In this case, jump button maps to spacebar. So in your game, if you want to change that, you can just change it right here. Instead of space, it'll be D key or F or G or whatever you map it to. But a jump button name is real because I went and just found the name for it. So that's okay. I called it that, and it's real. It connects. That's fine. Right. So who is using all of this? So let's see. I got 4 references on generate input. Okay, the agents are using it. That's great. I'm not really care about the ML agents right now. Base input, I already went over. That's like the parent class. But arcade cart, this is interesting. So this was, I said, the kind of parent, the script. If I pop out the script up here, that's like the more of the mega manager of the cart. So I'm interested wherever this this keyboard input connects to here. Is I'm thinking I'm not 100%, but I'm thinking that's where the connection is. So actually, before I jump up there, let me see something. Yeah, so notice jump button name jump. So I set it to jump, but you can change it later. But you better make sure it maps to something in that input manager. In either case, gather inputs. So we could loop through. So this input data, if it's the same as up here, it's a struct. Okay. And it wants to drift false. So I know that somebody was saying that in the WebGL build that there was a drifting that was turned on. Maybe that's where it was drift is true, but whatever. Okay, so the length of our inputs. Let me just go see what this thing is. Okay, it's just an array of that I input, that the array of the objects, the input objects here that this interface. So it looks like for each input, one of these can be created. Any case, I wanted to see if that was telling me something, but so for each of those that are created, generate input. Okay. So for each of the struct, they get their own input class. And so wants to drift. So if break and your rigid body transform is greater than 0. So if the direction of your cart is aiming at each moment during the update loop is 90 degrees off from your rigid body, then you're going to go into a drift. And if you're braking, so what a dot product is it looks at two vectors, and if they're pointing both in the same direction, you'll get 1. If they're pointing in opposite directions, you get -1. If they're pointing 90 degrees, you get 0, and everything else ranges in between that. So this is saying if you're going to enter into a drift mode, if the user is braking and the dot product of these two is greater than 0, meaning your car is kind of pointing in the direction, a forward direction of the rigid body that's kind of in the velocity that's going. Okay, then you enter drift. Great. But that still didn't show me where accelerate is being used. All right, so I'm just hunting around. Looks like there's quite a bit of accelerate. All right, so if the cart can move, looks like in this little snippet we're going to apply physics. So if the cart can move, we're going to move the vehicle with the accelerant, the brake input, and the turn input. So this is interesting. This might be where we can get a jump going in. So I'm going to jump to where move vehicle is. We're getting the accelerant if the user's pressing acceleration, minus if the user's pressing brake. So it looks like you can press the accelerant button with the brake button at the same time, and they compute the difference for final acceleration. And there's a curve coefficient. Manual acceleration curve coefficient. All right, that's going into the physics system, the rigid body, computing whatever its velocity should be. Use the max speed. So it looks like what our top. It's looking at the top speed and the reverse speed. Okay, so it's looking at what its current velocity is. So this is called a ternary operator. So all right, if this is whatever this is, if it's true, then this is assigned as our max speed. Otherwise, seeing if it's going forward or backward, and it's assigning. All right. if our current velocity is we're moving the cart forward, we need to figure out what our top speed is. If we're going backward, we figure out what our top reverse speed is. And it sets it to this. Acceleration, current speed, so maximum is braking. So it's just a lot of calculations for figuring out how to add acceleration. Turning, drift, turn angle, forward, movement. So our final vector 3 will be our forward direction, our acceleration input, our final acceleration, and then times some calculation if we're having a collision. Okay. Boy, there's a lot of calculations going on. So now we figured out all of our acceleration situation. Now they have to get involved in the rigid body, the physics system. I'm just figuring out where the final velocity gets applied. It's taking a while. All right, let me shrink this. Okay, here's my first bracket. Just want to be like, where am I? This is a long method. 300. Okay, it goes all the way down. Then activate. Drift, if we're drifting. Okay. So this is going to definitely take understanding this. This is going to take like all next class. But ultimately, what's happening is this move vehicle accepts in, um, whether the user is pressing the accelerate button, which is up. That's why it's a bool. Whether the user is pressing the brake, which is the down arrow, and it's only you're either pressing it or you're not. And how much of a turn input? Remember that float. So how much is it from -1 to 1, left to right? And for a keyboard, it's either -1, 0, or 1, but that's not the case with the gamepad. But ultimately, what you're going to do is you're going to need to enter in the jump. So who is calling move vehicle? So up here, if we can move, we pass in all of our input, and we're going to pass it jump. All right. So in this move vehicle, I'm guessing this is like part of, okay, it is. So there's update and fixed update. Update is run as quickly as possible, just based on how much processing needs to be done per loop. It's variable. You can get like 30 frames per second. You can get 60, 90, 120. You can get something really low as 15 or whatever. Fixed update is fixed. It's for physics calculations, and the variability of update doesn't suit that well. So fixed update mean every very fixed timing. I think it's like a tenth of a second, or it's under like physics. That tenth of a second would be probably a hundredth of a second, but fixed time step, 200th of a second. All right. But in either case, the fixed update is done because there's a lot of physics calculations done in here. But in either case, every 200th of a second, this whole method is run. Part of it is gathering the inputs, which I just updated. So now we do have a jump. We press the space bar, we'll get a bool is true when the space bar has been pressed, and we'll get a vertical acceleration going. But this is like 300 lines of code, so we're gonna have to spend Wednesday doing this. All right. Um, but at least it gets the going. So we'll switch over from first person shooter. We'll switch over to karting for a bit. Let's get these carts jumping. Eventually, I think the student was talking about hovering or what have you. But let's get a basic jump happening, which means our rigid body better have gravity applied to it. Yeah, use gravity. Good. So I could just give it a positive vertical acceleration just in that instance that we decide to jump. So the first time that the spacebar becomes true and our jump state is false, I can set jump to true, give us a positive acceleration, and then wait like a fifth of a second until we're able to actually jump again. Um, Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. You're in midair and you're pressing space, and that's like double and triple jumps and stuff. But in the karting, we're not doing that. But the gravity will pull you back down. And I don't even know if these calculations are figuring, is this cart leaving the ground? Is it, I guess, is ground? Oh, these are the wheels. So there's a lot going on here. This is like probably the biggest, meatiest part of karting, just because it's a karting game and how the physics of it moving is the most intense part because that's the center mechanic. But in either case, I'll move on to this on Wednesday. We'll get it jumping going. This is loud. All right. So sorry for being late. Just have a messy schedule. But we'll have a full day of class on Wednesday, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be online. I've just been hearing that some cases are popping up. Um, was someone in the lobby? Hold on one second. No, I don't think so. So let me get this video up. I just now I'm starting to get a little hesitant to come onto campus because it seems like quite a few cases are starting to pop up. But whatever. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. Um, Otherwise, I'll spend all day Wednesday just digging into this method. Interesting. I probably have to get rid of this because it wants to ground the car really fast if they're airborne. Yeah, have a good weekend.